Success does many things to people. To me, it brought about not only accomplishments, but it brought about pride.
Every home Alan Youngblood built, he built well.
I would look at myself and think that these accomplishments were absolutely all mine. Never even imagined that possibly in the background there could have been a God who was directing my life.
Alan ran a successful business constructing multi-million-dollar commercial buildings and luxury mansions, and everyone knew not to cross Alan Youngblood.
I became a person of anger, explosive, almost to the point of danger sometimes. Anger became the thing that ruled my life in so many ways. It gave me power. It gave me position.
And even though Alan went to church, his beliefs kept him far from God.
The way I saw God was that he was a God that knew everything that I did and saw every sin that I ever committed, and possibly writing them down in a book in heaven. I found it impossible to love a God who was out to get you.
Then one night on New Year's Eve, Alan went to church. As he stood at the communion rail, he says his soul was transported to another place, where he heard a voice that sounded like rushing waters.
The scripture came to me, and it says, if you say you love God and you hate your brother, you are no more than a liar and a murderer.
At that moment, he repented of his sins and experienced the forgiveness of God, something he had never really felt before. Alan was then carried away to a beautiful city with a gate made of pearl.
But when I walked through those gates, my mind could not even conceive what I would see. Have we read about the streets of gold? Yes, but they were different. They were suspended like a mighty highway with no visible means of suspension. As I neared that area, I saw cascading out of the throne of God a massive waterfall from which I believe flows the river of life.
Then Alan says he saw a friend named Jerry. Jerry had died years earlier in a fiery plane crash, but here in his vision, Jerry appeared normal, wearing a blue suit.
He turned and he held his hand and pointed toward the top of the platform of the throne of God. I thought, oh, am I going to see God?
A few moments later, Alan says he was standing as he had been at the front of the church. Alan's wife Barbara remembers what happened.
I didn't know what he was doing. It was, troubled me. I thought, oh my goodness, this is embarrassing. He's gone to sleep.
I said, honey, I did not go to sleep. And I can't tell you what happened to me until some other time.
For days after his heavenly encounter, Alan continued to be affected by what he remembered.
His whole attitude was one of softness. The hard look that he had was gone.
Alan began to speak publicly about his experience in heaven. At one meeting, he saw the widow of his friend Jerry, the man in the blue suit that he had seen in heaven. As Alan described the scene, Jerry's widow spoke up. She revealed she had given the blue suit to the funeral director to put into the coffin, even though her husband's body had been so badly burned. That suit was the same suit Alan says he saw Jerry wearing in heaven. That's when Alan realized why he had seen his friend in heaven.
To go back home, to tell one woman, there is a God, there is a heaven, there's life after death, and Jerry's there.
Alan continues to tell others that heaven is real in a new book called Voice of Many Waters.
God's greatest desire is that you know who he is and how he is and how much he loves you. It's impossible not to fall in love with him when you really begin to have that relationship, the greatest relationship you will ever know.
In September 1996, Hurricane Fran slammed into the Carolinas. In the storm's aftermath, Georgia power worker Rick Moncrief was assigned to clear downed power lines in North Carolina. He was on a rooftop trying to pull a line from under a fallen tree when the line snapped. He fell backwards and landed headfirst on the concrete driveway. He was flown to Duke Medical Center. His wife, Donna, was told to prepare for her husband's funeral.
I felt a lot of fear, and I felt concern, and I had every scenario going through my brain. How am I going to raise 3 daughters by myself? I'm too young to be a widow. You name it, those kind of thoughts came through my head.
Rick had several broken ribs, and his brain was hemorrhaging. 10 minutes after he arrived at the hospital, he slipped into a coma.
He was hooked up to a breathing machine and all kinds of machines. And so I just looked at him, you know, I was in shock, I think. I couldn't believe that he was laying there. And the doctors were just saying that it was a wait-and-see game. They didn't know. I believed in prayer, and I knew that Jesus was the healer. In my own strength right that moment, I didn't have that strength in myself to pray. And so I had believers and friends who were praying for me, as well as for Rick, that we would, you know, that we would be able to come through this.
The prayers continued, and by day 5, Rick was still unresponsive. At least it appeared that way.
I was taken into the throne room of God. It was more real than you are. It was so real, and everything was just so white, whiter than white. And I was on my belly, on my face before the Lord, and I saw his feet as fine burned brass. I didn't see his face, but he asked me, what do you want to do? And I kept hearing the scripture over and over, whose report will you believe? Will you believe the report of the Lord or believe the report of the doctors? And I said, I want to live. I want to live and declare the word of the Lord. And he stood up and he clapped his hands and he said, that's enough. And when he said, that's enough, I began immediately to come out of the coma.
His doctor said Rick would never be the same again. Rick and Donna believed differently.
She said, well, you're the most luckiest person in the world now that you ever came out of this coma. And you recovered from this fall a little bit, but it'll be 60 months minimum, which is 5 years, before you will ever be 40% back. And I told her, I said, no, ma'am. I said, I don't mean any disrespect at all to you, but I said, it's not going to take that long. The Lord's going to do a quick work.
During rehab, Rick says he read Psalms in the Bible, and he and Donna joined their friends and family in prayer.
I was believing for the healing, and my friends were believing for the healing, because we believe by his stripes we are healed.
Each day his health improved, and after just 27 days of rehab, Rick had a 95% recovery.
When I came back to work at the power company in the early part of 1997, I came back to work full duty.
The faithfulness of God comes to my mind, that our God, at the immediate cry of our heart, will hear us, and he listens, and he's faithful.
The great doctors at these two great hospitals did all they could do, but it was the Father's love. It was his grace. It was his compassion on me to allow me to live today and live these 18 years since this has happened.
Rick later retired from the power company and became a pastor. He cherishes every moment he has with his wife and family and says he doesn't let a day go by without giving thanks to God for his miraculous healing.
Every day is an incredible day. Every day is just, there's always a lot to be thankful for. I'm just thankful that I feel better today than I did yesterday. I'm thankful today that I'm able to stand up. I'm thankful today I don't have a massive headache this morning. I'm thankful today that I'm able to breathe by myself without a machine. I'm just thankful.
Hawaii, the Bahamas, the Virgin Islands. These are just a few of the exotic locations where Darnisha and Scott Taylor have scuba dived. As experienced divers, they thought they were prepared for anything, but in the waters of Crystal Lake, Michigan, death lurked underwater.
We got prepared, put on our gear, and we started wading out into the water. What you do is you get to a ledge, At the ledge, it drops down 50 feet.
Scott and Darnisha explored the bottom of the lake for 30 minutes.
The ledge is your marker. If you stay on the ledge, you're always in the right place, basically. But this day, we lost track of the ledge. And so my husband turns around to me, looks at the compass again to try to get a bearing. And when he looks at me, he sees that my equipment is not working, that I've got bubbles coming out of air escaping from someplace.
When I saw the small stream, constant stream of air bubbles coming off her air hose, not her breathing air hose, the hose that connects to her BC or buoyancy control vest.
And so he gestured to me to ascend to the surface so that I could fix my coupler, and then I could also kind of see where we were in the lake.
Darnisha surfaced while Scott waited for her 50 feet below.
So I was trying to fix the coupler and it would not reattach. If you know anything about scuba diving, you know that you add extra weight in order to be able to stay on the bottom. So I was carrying at least probably 50 to 70 extra pounds of weight, and I was fighting against that to stay on top of the water.
At that time, I tried to start a clock in my mind to know that she's going to do a safety stop, which is between 3 and 5 minutes, is standard in diving. And then she's going to be on the surface and clasp it and then head back down. So I'm trying to run these numbers in my head because I know, if it goes beyond this, there's something wrong when you call off the dive.
I was starting to get winded and tired. So I thought, well, before I run out of air, let me fill out my BC manually, which is really the first thing that you're supposed to do. So I went to depress the valve to fill it up, and no air would go in. I was like, okay, this is not going to work. So I started really feeling like I'm in trouble. So I started praying, God, please send my husband to the surface. Please let him know that I need help.
Darnisha struggled for several minutes. She had no more strength to stay afloat.
I remember one of my final prayers to the Lord being, okay, Father, if this is your will, then I'm going to trust you to take care of everything that needs to be taken care of. That was the moment I shut my eyes and said, okay, Lord, just help me to swim straight. And that's when I drifted off into eternity.
Got up to the surface, but was kind of surprised when, as I went up, that she was not around or not hanging on the line. I did a 360 a couple times, looking around. So I started looking for air bubbles on the surface.
I woke up on my knees in this place that was, the only way that I can describe it is it was a room, but it had no walls. It was just a wide open, bright space. It was so peaceful. It was very pure. In the distance, I could tell there was this great destination, this gateway, this place that people were entering into. I remember feeling like I was home, even though it didn't necessarily look like my house. It was a place that I knew I was welcomed.
Darnisha saw other people in her vision, and one of them in particular caught her attention.
We didn't talk, though, but we communicated. And it was as if she was asking me, are you coming? And I didn't know what to say.
The anxiety started increasing there a little bit more. I started doing a spin. I started yelling her name out.
Scott finally saw his wife. She was 200 yards away. He swam toward her.
I kept popping back up to the surface to adjust my bearings to make sure I was swimming in that direction.
By the time Scott reached Darnisha, she was sinking to the bottom of the lake.
Everything went black. And I started reacting like, what just happened? I'm home. Why are they bothering me? And that was the moment that I remembered what happened with the accident and that I had drowned. Before that, in this peaceful place, I didn't remember any of that. I remember having to talk to myself and say, okay, I have a decision to make. And I remember actually having to specifically make the decision. Do I stay or do I come back? I heard clearly, you need to relax and let him bring you back. And so I said, okay. And I inhaled and allowed the process to happen.
Absolute miracle that that I even found her in that lake. So I had her, my arm around her, the back, and just pounding as hard as I could on her chest and breathed into her mouth. And that first breath, just the first air coming back out of her lungs, wasn't her breathing yet, was just horrifying because all I could hear was the water gurgling in her lungs.
Scott spotted a boat, and he screamed for help.
As soon as the boat cut its engines, the first thing I heard was prayers of all three of the people on the boat praying and crying out to Jesus for help. As soon as we got her up, she coughed out all the water out of her lungs and started breathing.
Scott and Darnisha were taken to shore. He drove her to the nearest hospital, 45 minutes away. After MRI tests and x-rays, Darnisha was treated and released the same day.
The report that the doctor gave back was, it looks really great. It looks like it doesn't even hardly look like she had this type of an accident.
There are so many people that God has behind the scenes on earth and in the heavenlies that are working for our benefit and for our good.
He does not expect that our willpower will get us through difficult circumstances. That he understands that there is a process, that there are emotional things that we'll have to walk through, that there are circumstances that we didn't foresee, that he is still more than capable of giving us grace to be able to get onto the other side. It's about whatever is dealt to you, that you are able to walk through it with the love and the grace of God. And he will give you what you need in order to make it.
You only get one life unless you're a local 25-year-old who says he is on his fourth. Davidson Tendry has the story.
Rain has kept games away from the softball diamond today, but whether or not Landon Whitley is able to toss the ball, this is where he feels closest to his late father.
And it felt like every time I was there on the field, even though I couldn't see him physically, it felt like inside of me he was there.
In 1997, all was well. Landon and his parents were driving home from church when they were T-boned at a Mint Hill intersection. Landon lost his father that day. His mother was severely hurt, but survived.
I didn't understand where God was at to allow the tragedy.
Landon's father was driving the vehicle. His seat flew back, crushing Landon in the back seat. Initially, medics couldn't even tell there was a child in the car.
But one of the workers found the child's shoe. And when they found his shoe, they started looking for the body that matched.
3 times that day, Landon died, flatlined. Paramedics worked to save him. He says each time he went to heaven where he was with Jesus, angels, his father, and 2 siblings he had never known existed.
My mom had 2 miscarriages before me that I had never known about, never heard about. I was able to see them.
Landon says his trip to heaven was a short one. He says Jesus told him it wasn't his time. So back to earth where it took time for Landon's injuries to mend.
We got 23 metal plates in my head. My nose was reconstructed out of the back part of my skull, and I can't see out of my left eye, or better yet, it's all blurry.
His mother, Julie, her scars are more emotional. And to cope, she wrote a book detailing the family's healing process over the years.
These days, I can thank God for giving me the strength to get through it. I didn't see the strength when I was going through all that. I saw the challenges and the hurt.
Okay, so right now we're driving up to the intersection where Landon's accident happened. And Landon, just tell me, what goes through your mind when you approach this scene?
I pass by here almost every day, and of course it sparks back memories from the past, but at the same time it just became part of my normal everyday life of going through here.
Landon is even to the point where he can make light of his situation.
Someone could say, Landon, you and I are about to have a come to Jesus talk. I was like, well, I've already came to him 3 times.
Now in his mid-20s, baseball is replaced with softball, and he proudly wears the number his dad once gave him.
And to get more information on this story or watch it again, head to our Facebook page, Fox 46 Carolinas. Rob?
All of a sudden, I felt this hot pierce. Then everything went black.
Matthew and Nancy Botsford worked hard and played even harder. They pursued everything in life with gusto, except when it came to God.
I knew God existed, but that's it. That's it. Yeah, that's it.
But everything changed on one March night in 1992. Matthew and 2 sales associates were in Atlanta on business. They had just left a restaurant and had gone outside to catch a taxi when suddenly... Matthew and his friends never saw it coming. A group of men behind them were arguing when 3 of them pulled out 9mm Uzis and started shooting. One of Matthew's friends took a bullet to the head and died instantly. The other one was unharmed. Matthew was also shot in the head, and he too died.
Utter blackness. Incredible fear. I went to a place, what I believe was hell. It was void of anything good. Icy cold beyond any words can describe. And this hand came down towards me. And as it did, it brought warmth, just flooding this room, this area that I was in, with this brilliant white light. And then I felt this motion. I was being pulled upwards. I heard this voice, and it said, "It's not your time."
Matthew was resuscitated on the scene and taken to Piedmont Hospital in Atlanta. Nancy flew in from their home state of Michigan. Her first meeting with the doctor was devastating.
He said, if he makes it through the night, there's a 30% chance to get through the night. After that, he'll probably be in a wheelchair. And they didn't know with the brain injury that if he'd be a vegetable or not. At that point, they didn't know. And he says, and he might even have to be in an institution.
Nancy took a walk down a corridor to clear her head.
In front of me, I just started seeing this blackness. I just got the horrible news of Matthew, and it was just incredible. And this blackness just started getting in front of me, just getting bigger, and I just felt myself falling into this blackness. I had no control. I was just losing it. And that's when I felt this heavy hand on my right shoulder, and there was nobody there. And right then I knew it was Jesus. I went straight back to Matt's room, and he's all wrapped up and bandaged, and I just said, Lord, and I'm not saved, nothing. I went, Lord, bring back my husband, even if he's in a wheelchair. It doesn't matter, but bring back who he is, who his heart is, who his personality is. I promise I'll stay with him.
That promise would be tested. Matthew was in a coma and flatlined several times. Nancy lived hour to hour, as it seemed that one crisis followed another. But with every crisis came a glimmer of hope.
It seems like every situation, it would be critical, and then things would turn around. He was put on a kidney dialysis. They said, oh, he'll be on this for 3 weeks, 3 days. Things turned around.
After 27 days, Matthew awoke from his coma.
It was incredible. It was like being reconnected. But as soon as that connection, and he woke up, I said, that's it. So the whole focus was now to get him on his feet. to go against the odds that he's going to be in a wheelchair, he's going to an institution.
The left side of Matthew's body was paralyzed. But even worse, the damage to his brain affected his ability to think and perform even the simplest of tasks. They returned to Michigan, where Matthew started rehab, trying to rebuild his body and his mind.
The rehab was painful. I mean, physically it was painful. Cognitively it was painful. I mean, I remember I would do simple things like run through the alphabet in my head, you know, make sure I could go from A to Z. They were teaching me and helping me how to eat.
For 2.5 long years, Matthew worked through the pain with Nancy by his side. Progress was slow. He eventually left the wheelchair and walked with a cane. But recovering mentally was a much slower process. But Nancy remembered her promise to stay with Matthew through it all.
Cognitively, he was not with it. He was in la-la land. And so, yeah, it was that thought of, you know, boy, I didn't sign up for this. But I remembered I made that promise, and that was stronger than what I signed up for.
The Botsfords were so focused on Matthew's regimen, they all but forgot their experiences with God.
There was no focus there. There was no focus. It was all about Matthew and get him, you know, more, to get more therapies.
That is, until they moved to Florida. One day, Matthew met a neighbor while out taking a walk.
And I remember kind of like looking up and saying, hey, where's a good church around here? And I just like floored me what came out of my mouth and floored my wife.
I said, what? We're not looking for a church.
But eventually, they attended an Easter service.
We just knew then, we both looked at each other and said, this is it. This is what we need.
And it was this peace, this anchor, this stability. It just like took us over.
Through the years, they began to recognize God's hand in their journey. Today, Matthew walks without the help of a cane. Mentally, he earned a college degree and is writing a series of sci-fi children's books called Johnny Rocket. All of which is pretty amazing, considering the bullet is still in Matthew's head. But the big miracle in this story?
When I was dead, I didn't cry out for God. But yet he came down and with his own hand pulled me up out of hell and says, it's not your time. I mean, that's a loving God.
The miracle is how God so much loved Matthew that he didn't just leave him in hell, that he brought him up. But the miracle is how he changed his heart. God exchanged his heart for Matthew's and gave him his own. That's the miracle.
September 25th, 2012. Cops follow a tip. The man they're after is inside an apartment building. Officer Ali Perez takes the lead.
I was in charge of investigating a case where the woman discovered that her 2 daughters were being molested by her live-in boyfriend.
As they approach, the suspect, Daniel Witzak, is waiting, armed with a high-powered rifle.
He won't come to the door.
Sheriff's office, open up!
I mule kick the door. The door goes flying open, and I take 1 step, and he opens fire. First round hits me in the left arm, right here, right in the middle of my arm.
Officer Perez and his partner return fire. The suspect is wounded but keeps shooting. Perez can't find cover. He takes more hits before he and the shooter empty their clips.
It's a race to reload. I was having a very hard time coming to terms with the fact that this is where I was going to meet my end, that I was going to die right here, and I knew it, and there was nothing I could do to change it. And I expect a bullet to the head any moment, and that's when the miracle happens. Our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ, was there. I didn't see him appear, but he was in between us. He was already there when I raised my eyes, and it was magnificent. I knew 1 or 2 things was going to happen. Either 1, I'm going home to the Lord, or 2, I'm going home to Gracie and the kids, and either one is a win. And I said, Lord, I trust you completely. What do you want me to do with this guy? And I watched him. He picked up the feather that was in the ink bottle, and he wrote. And then he put the feather back in the ink bottle. And And this note, it was the size of a 3x5 index card. It flies off the desk like a leaf in the wind. And I watched it with my eyes. I tracked it with my eyes. And then I came down here and it landed right here on my vest. And I pick it up and I read it. And it says, I want you to bless him. Now, keep in mind, this is a guy that just ripped my arm almost completely off, shot a hole through my body, shot the supervisor, horribly molested these 2 little girls. Jesus didn't say reload and finish the job. He said, I want you to bless him. So I looked right at the bad guy and said, God bless you, brother.
Officer Perez sees more visions before noticing Witzak staring at him.
Looks at me and he asked me, would you like to crawl out to your friends now? Real almost, his mannerisms changed. Now up to this point, I don't know if he sees Jesus or not. I have no idea. I don't know. So I said, yes. I said, yeah, I'm ready to go.
Witzak helps Perez towards the front door. By now, a backup team has arrived, and they start firing. Witzak retreats. Perez is left alone. And then, the door opens on its own.
I'm in no condition to open doors and turn handles and do all this stuff. Bad guy never made it to the door. Rescue team's at the bottom of the stairs. They never made it to the door. How did the door get opened? God opened that door.
Officer Perez crawls to the doorway, and a member of the rescue team carries him to safety. Witzak eventually surrenders and is taken into custody, while Perez is taken to the ER to fight for his life. Doctors tell his family he has no chance of survival.
Everybody dropped on their knees right there and started praying, and not just at the hospital, but at the Santee station and at stations all across the county. Everybody got on their knees and prayed because the word went out like fire. And I'm alive because of the power of prayer.
After 27 surgeries and hours of grueling physical therapy, Officer Perez testifies at Witzak's trial. He takes the opportunity to extend grace to the man who tried to kill him. Daniel Witzak is currently serving a life sentence. Ali Perez is medically retired and continues to recover. But he says he's gained far more than he's lost.
I got to spend 3 minutes with Jesus before my day of judgment. And if I got some cuts and bruises along the way and I lose the use of my arm, it was worth it. Every heartbeat and every breath is a gift from God. Oh, I am so thankful. I am thankful to be here. I'm thankful for the opportunity to testify to people that he is true, that God is real, that Jesus loves us so very, very, very much. And there's an opportunity that we've got to, before it's too late, get on our knees, humble ourselves before him, and get right with the Lord.